Rick Hale. It is Mojo Monday, my favorite day of the week. How the heck are you?
Life's good. Life's good. It's another Mojo Monday. So how could it not be good? We get to do this. I mean, hang out and think high-minded thoughts around a conversation worth having. So Here we are, and we're having it. We love our listeners. So thanks for tuning in.
I love it. You texted me a thought for today's conversations, and I loved it. And I think it's going to go 1,000 directions. And one of the coolest parts about this is maybe we kind of have an idea what we're going to talk about, but it's not scripted. So let's see where this goes. Here's our thought. What does the power of crafting your eulogy today do for you? It's the power of crafting your eulogy today. And I want to start with something before we dive into the specifics of this. I think this is a really hard exercise for a lot of people. And I think there's a lot of people that are very scared to do this exercise. You want to speak to that?
Well, it's all about mortality, and whether they're scared or not probably depends on their experience with mortality or losing a loved one early in life. Or when you're young, man, I don't know about you, but I thought I had infinite time. Like, you're just like, you can be having do whatever. You don't need a lot because you're young and you're, free spirited. And, you just think you're going to bounce off everything and land right back on your feet. And as you get older, you realize, man, taking health and circumstances and other people in your life for granted, man, there's no guarantee, man. It's not a dress rehearsal. We get one run at it.
Yeah. I also think in an internal thing would be, hey, I want to live a life that's meaningful. And if you're forcing me to write my eulogy, I actually have to come face to face with, am I living a meaningful life? And that means I gotta address that head on. Like, what does my life's purpose look like? What does the meaning to my life really look like? And that's very deep, and that can touch some emotional, I don't want to call them triggers, some emotional depth inside of your heart and your head that might be a little scary to go there. But on the other side of it, I think that's where we're saying there's real power in crafting your eulogy today.
100%. And you got to begin with the end in mind, right? If you don't, if you don't know where you're going, you'll get there. I don't know if you've ever heard that. And GPS only works when there's 2 coordinates, which means you have to know where you are and where you're going. And one of the reasons, that this thought popped into my head as I was thinking about some of the cooler people I know who are truly legacy rich impact, empire builders. And one was Miss Tilly, who created a nonprofit called Every Woman Works. And she's a miraculously gifted woman, spent her entire career in corporate America doing fine, and then retired early. And I say early, probably when most people retire, but instead of retiring, she kind of woke up on the other side, realizing she hadn't fulfilled her real destiny in terms of impacting the world and doing something that mattered. And she was volunteering it was a homeless shelter for women. And long story short, at one point she realized these women were cycling in and out, and they would come in, be there for a duration, clean up, get help, get food, get shelter, often with kids, and then they'd go back into the world, and they really weren't equipped to handle the real world. And so she realized the opportunity was they need curriculum, and they need to reframe and retrain or just train not only skills and capacity to serve in a working environment, but often it's health and life skills and parenting skills. So she crafted a 30-day program called Every Woman Works, and it's a beautiful thing. I invited her to speak at one of our leadership academies, and she asked me kind of where she should go with it. And I said, well, I'm impressed that you've got this vision. And she's like, what's funny? I did, but I didn't. It just showed up, and I didn't ignore the calling. And she said, and I said, well, what do you want to talk about? And she said, at this stage of life, I'm thinking a lot about where the landing is. What happens when it's all said and done? And she said, what if you had more power over your life to the extent you write your eulogy before you ever require it? And I'm like, man, that's deep, and I love it. And I had no idea how she would do it. She came in, she broke us into pairs, and in each pair you had to share your life story and then you had to overlay that with what you almost had to make up, like what would people say about you whenever that last day on earth comes. And so we fed that person a story based on our current beliefs plus a future expectation and hope. And the real magic, to be honest, Brett, was at the end of it all. We thought we were just getting to know each other and it was a healthy personal self-discovery, moment. She required that we get up and read the other person's eulogy to them in front of the class. And you talk about real,
not yours, but the other person's.
Yeah, you had to read it as if, because, the word eulogy means EU means good, logos is speech. So you had to get up and give a good speech about that person you just interviewed. And man, it inspired better listening.
In other words, if we were partners, I'm reading your eulogy to the group and you're sitting in the audience as if you're kind of there.
you're standing next to them as if you were laying down next to them, which is morbidly weird. And you talk about shaping perspective and making it real. And, it left a mark, and a positive mark, on who I am and why I am and what I want to become as part of the journey.
Yeah. There's a couple things that I think are powerful about this. One is there's a concept that says begin with the end in mind. It speaks to the GPS. You got to have a point A and a point B. And when you begin with the end in mind, you're putting priority on things. You're getting clarity around the journey, right? And what I think that is important here is two words. One is urgency and the other is importance. So, Rick, I think one of the conversations I'd like to have is if I said, hey, you're going to go to the doctor today and you got 6 months to live. Well, automatically your timetable gets sped up to where you got 6 months that you're going to live with urgency, right? And that urgency to try to get it all in a finite amount of time. Well, the opposite of that is most of us live our lives thinking we have an infinite amount of time left, right? And talked about, you thought when you were a young child, you thought about it being infinite, right? Like it's not even on the radar that you're gonna die someday, right?
Yeah.
But I guess the question is, most people probably think they got 20, 40, depending on where they're at in life, right? Years left, 50 years left. But what's the right time frame to create importance? If I said you got 5 years left, or man, you got 10 years left to live, is that the right runway just to play the mental game to where you're going to go, hey, I need to get real clear on what's important? What are your thoughts?
So that's why I wrote a book called Stop Settling. And it's, finding clear directions for a regret-free life. And my observations, and having lived, a 20-year experience of 4 or 5 year, 5-year future selves that I've strung together, is that if you wait 20 years to start, there's a whole lot of catching up and making up to do. And as you get older, catching up and making up's a lot harder. You've already, if relationships are let go and you release them, and it's harder to circle back. The longer, the more distance in time and the more distance in emotional energy, it gets harder. It doesn't get easier. So I think there's a certain element of live like it's your last day today. And that doesn't mean live stupidly. It means make the priority and the main thing. And then learn and experience life like you'll live forever. And so somehow at the apex of those two, there's got to be reality that helps shape today's decision-making, that if it were a year or 5 or 20 and not 50, you're at least on the journey. You'll have fewer regrets.
Yeah. 100%.
You'll have fewer regrets. And it's also about taking it in bite-sized pieces and making sure that, you're not living in one lane of life, that you've got a holistic approach to true joy and fulfillment.
Yeah. And one thing that I think a lot of people leave off in this conversation, right, is like, we've all watched that movie, The Bucket List, and there's those experiences or those things that we all want to do before we die, which is really it's a good chunk of this conversation for sure. But there's an element defined by relationships. And if you think you have an infinite amount of time, you treat relationships a little bit differently than if you had a finite amount of time. And then the purpose, or the power, I should say, of writing the eulogy today is, does it cause you to treat your relationships a little bit different from a place of priority and importance? And I would think it would very much so. Like, my mother passed away just a couple years ago, and that was probably the closest person. Obviously, when your parent passes away outside of a spouse or a child, that makes you become very, very aware how much time is finite.
Mhm.
And my father's still alive, so I still believe I'm not spending as much time as I absolutely would love to spend with him. And it's something that I'm constantly working on, because at the end of the day, that's a key relationship in my life that I want to know that I fulfilled. And I want to know that I fulfilled my role to his life, right?
Yeah. And sometimes people get caught up in the reality or the thought of reality that it's got to be complicated and grand or big. And, as I get older, I'm starting to really recognize that the little things are the big things and the big things are the little things. And that the secret is to eliminate the noise and the distraction and get really clear in the conversations that matter most, the experiences that matter most, and make sure you're prioritizing your day and your life accordingly.
Yeah.
And you're not watering the weeds. You're not spending a lot of time trying to nurture things that either don't deserve your time or attention, or frankly, don't stand a high percentage chance of surviving.
Absolutely. I think the challenge this week, Rick, is really sit down and bullet point it, write it out, craft it out, start it. What do you think's going to be important to you at the end of your life? Get that going. And I know where my heart is, and I believe I know where yours is. We'd take that call from any one of you that listen to this podcast if you need guidance or help crafting that. But that's really the challenge this week. This week. I do have one more question though before we go. And this one's a little bit of an ode to our friend Eric Saperston. So Rick Hale, what are the three things you hope are said about you at your funeral?
This is totally unscripted, by the way, for the listener.
That's the
And
best part.
I know. One is that I never said no for the right reasons. That's a big part of it, in that I'm always open and available to help people that are, when I say worthy of being helped, don't get me wrong. I'm not attempting to be judgmental. I think everyone deserves, a hand up and necessarily not a handout, but I want to be known as the guy that was there when you needed me most, and the guy that gave you, kind of the wind beneath your sail and pushed you forward and helped you stand back on your feet long enough to stay on your feet. Number two, that I made a difference in that I really lived life big and fulfilled in, experiential opportunities, and that I didn't go halfway. The third is that I had a genuine heart for humanity and made the world a little bit better place, one conversation at a time, like ours.
That's really powerful. I hope everybody accepts our challenge and starts their eulogy today. Rick Hale, it is Mojo Monday, my friend.
It is. So go to work on your bucket list. At least make sure you're chopping that down, and then backfill who goes with you to enhance the relationship.